So guys, to continue on with my current new appreciation with 24 volt systems, I had to get a 24 volt, a good 24 volt inverter. So today in this video, we're gonna be going over this Giandel inverter, make sure that it can at least output up to its rated current wattage. We're gonna test the sine, make sure it's pure sine, all that good stuff. Now for the past year and a half, I've used a 12 volt Giandel 2200 watt inverter, and it has been an absolute workhorse. It's a great inverter. It is a high frequency inverter. It's not a super expensive inverter, but they are very, very nice inverters in my opinion. But what we have here is a 3000 watt 24 volt Giandel high frequency inverter. But guys, this thing is built, it is heavy. This is not a cheap, lightweight inverter. I am surprised when I got this package delivered just how heavy this little slash big inverter is. But let me show you some of the features of this inverter, and then we're just gonna hook it up to one of my 24 volt batteries and see if this thing performs well. So here is the 3000 watt 24 volt inverter. It does come shipped with some pretty decent 4 gauge positive and negative cables with the terminal leads already crimped on, heat shrinked on. I do already have it installed. Coming around to the front section of this guy, you do have an LCD readout that I'll show you once we get this thing hooked up. You've got a grounding rod terminal. You got 2 AC outputs. You've got a standard USB-A output. It does have a remote that you can use that'll plug into this data terminal right here. So it's got about a 20-foot cable on this thing that you can wire to wherever you actually want to turn this inverter on. So that makes it a little bit better. You don't always have to turn it on directly from the front of this unit. And also, right here, you can hardwire this inverter by simply taking off this panel. And this comes off, and here you can see if you want to run Romex directly to this and wire it directly to a couple of outlets, you can use this instead of actually having to plug in to these right here if you want a more permanent install. But I'm not going to be doing that in this video, but we're going to cover this up. But it's nice to have these hardwire terminals here just in case you do want to actually just run some pretty permanent outlets. So on both sides of this inverter, it's got little feet here with some notches cut in that you can put a screw in to, of course, affix to a wall or a table or inside the basement of an RV so it doesn't move around. But that's basically it for this inverter, and let's get it hooked up to a battery to make sure that it works. So I've got the inverter now hooked up to this Lipuls 24 volt battery, and let's give it a shot. Let's turn this thing on for the first time. And we've got that reading 26.6 volts. And honestly, in my experience, these aren't ever really that close to actual battery voltage, but we'll give it a shot. Okay, 26.7 volts. I take it back. So this is actually, that's dead on accurate actually. 26.6, 26.7. I'll take it. So I'm going to plug in this remote switch to make sure that it'll cut on and off. So we get a green power button. Okay, cuts on and off the inverter. And it cuts on the inverter. So far so good. Now let's put a load on it. So let's start off with a little 500 watt space heater over here. Okay, so this is showing 26.2 volts. 25.9. So again, we're still pretty close. Now again, this is not a huge load. This is only around 500 watts. I'm going to put a heat gun on it, and then we'll put a clamp meter on this to make sure everything's working well. And I will say, guys, in the real world, this should be fused. I do not have a fuse right now, so I'm going to be real careful doing this test. But if I was actually using this for a home situation or in an RV, this definitely needs to have an inline fuse rated to at least 3000 watts. But for this little test, I think with me being out here, I think we're going to be okay. But it's obviously running that just fine. Let's get a heat gun going. I've got my heat gun right here, which on average pulls around 13 to 1400 watts. And I'm just gonna go straight gas, turn this thing on as high as it can go. All right. Let's see how we're doing in terms of sine wave. So in terms of voltage, this is outputting 118 volts. And for the sine wave, just kind of what I would expect from Giandel, guys. That is a perfectly clean sine wave. Pushing around 1400 watts. I got all kinds of meters out here. 62 amps. Let's plug in this little 500 watt heater now. .43 volts directly from the battery. 24 volts is showing on the screen on the inverter. Okay, up and close. 24.45 connected directly to my battery. 24.1 off of the inverter. We are pulling 85 amps, running a 500 watt space heater and a 1500 watt heat gun. Obviously still cool to the touch. We're not even really touching the capacity of that inverter. This is a 100 amp battery, 100 amp BMS battery, so that is probably the limiting factor of this whole setup, is that I can't reach 3000 watts because that battery's BMS is going to shut down before this inverter does. But we can push it just a little bit further. So here's the second heat gun. Running out of room here. That's kicking us up to 112 amps, 133 amps, 23.52 volts, 133 amps. Nothing going on in terms of heat wise. 73 degrees. Okay, well, I have my voltage meter here. One more time, let's just check. Yep, still sitting at 118 volts. So I guess we'll do a little 5-minute test. So we'll go ahead and start this. I'll come back in 5 minutes and check to make sure everything's working well and check the temperature of this inverter. But again, this really isn't touching the surface of what this inverter can do. But it's all working as should, working really well. I'm a big fan of these Giandel inverters, to be honest with you. I think they're really nice inverters. But we'll come back in 5 minutes and check. All right, I'm coming back in 3 minutes. I'm gonna plug in one more. I'm gonna plug in this other heat gun to try to get the amps up to at least 100 amps to match what the capability of this battery is. Okay, that's putting us right at around 94 amps. That's as close as I can get it without it going up past 100 amps. We're at 4 minutes in now. All right, folks, well, we are at 5 minutes and 30 seconds into this test, pulling 94 amps, which by my calculations is around 2300 watts. And again, this inverter's a 3000 watt rated continuous inverter, but I don't want to try to get up to that because I don't want to trip this BMS and this battery off. But we're getting just a tad warm now, nothing crazy. 79.3. So only a few degrees higher than when we first tested, 79.9. So yeah, I think I had no doubt, to be honest, that this inverter would do good, given my past experience with the 12 volt inverters from Giandel. But guys, if you don't want to spend a whole bunch of money on low frequency Victron inverters, I honestly think these Giandels are a really good option. They're a little bit pricier than your standard cheaply made inverters, but I do think that they are a pretty good option if you want a good quality inverter, a good quality high frequency inverter. All of mine have done really, really well. So I am glad I picked this up because I'm going to be doing a lot more testing on some 24 volt batteries, and this is going to be my new workhorse for all of those testing scenarios. So yeah, I'm glad I got a good one that's going to give me accurate results. So I'm going to cut this off with the switch, and we're done. So folks, I'll put a description for the inverter that I got down below in the video description. Again, I don't think you can go wrong with the Giandel. Ask even Mr. Will Prowse. He kind of likes him too. So as we all know, he's kind of deemed the king of this solar stuff. And again, they're just good quality inverters at a pretty decent price. So it obviously worked really well on this test. So it will be my new go-to for some of my new 24 volt battery testings. And this battery will be next up in the list of testing to make sure that it's a good battery. But overall, this little setup worked really well. And moving on with my new love for 24 volt systems, and then eventually we'll maybe even go to 48 volt, who knows. But gang, thanks for watching. Stay tuned, we'll be back with more. Thanks.